The blood drained from my face as I pressed my ear against the study door. My father's voice cut through the wood like a blade. "Vanessa will smile while we do it, or she's out, simple." My sister Olivia's laugh followed, sharp and cruel. "It's perfect. Everyone will be there to see it." My mother's murmur of agreement made my stomach twist into a knot so tight I couldn't breathe. The family Christmas gathering had become something else. The one I'd spent months planning and paying for wasn't a celebration. It was an ambush. They were going to humiliate me in front of everyone, then discard me like I'd never mattered. My name is Vanessa Reed. I'm 29, and I've been my family's invisible backbone for years. This is the story of how I stopped holding up a house that was never mine. The betrayal shouldn't have surprised me. I'd spent my life being useful, not valued. Every family dinner I'd cooked while they toasted someone else's success. Every holiday I'd organized while they claimed the credit. The kind of ache that makes your teeth meet too hard, like the only thing holding you together is bite pressure. I moved away from the door before they could discover me, my mind racing faster than my heart. I'd only come to drop off the final catering invoice using my key when no one answered the doorbell. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away seconds that suddenly felt precious, each breath calculated, each step planned. I wasn't going to scream or cry. Emotions were luxuries they didn't deserve from me anymore. For a week, I worked in silence. Phone calls at midnight when no one would notice. I used my position as event planner to contact all vendors and caterers directly, leveraging my name on the contracts and my personal credit card on the deposits. Vendors contacted and redirected. I created 2 lists, one for what I owed them, nothing, and one for what they owed me, everything. The family Christmas celebration would proceed exactly as planned, just not for them. On December 24th, my mother called, artificial sweetness dripping from every word. "Vanessa, where are you? Everyone's waiting." I laughed. A sound so unfamiliar it almost startled me. Don't wait for me, and don't wait for the catering either. Silence stretched across the line like ice forming on a window. Then, "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. In my apartment, the radiator hummed against the December chill. Outside, the air smelled of chimney smoke and possibility. I opened the window and let the cold climb in, steadying myself against what came next. You can measure a lifetime in what you're willing to swallow. I was done swallowing. They had built the stage for my humiliation themselves. Warm lights strung across the dining room, glossy place cards at every seat, a microphone ready for my sister's rehearsed roast that would end with my father announcing my removal from the family business. What they had forgotten was that the daughter they had relegated to fetching napkins and planning parties knew exactly where the invoices lived, where the accounts were managed, where the real power resided. I set my phone down as it vibrated with another call. My father, this time, declined. A text from my aunt. "Bring the cranberry tart at least." A smile tugged at my lips. The tart was already being served at the homeless shelter downtown. So were the catering trays, each one labeled meticulously. Salmon, main table. Roast, head table. Every single item I had ordered and paid for, redirected. I zipped my coat, picked up an unmarked envelope, and stepped into the night. The cold air sliced against my cheeks, but it felt cleaner than anything that lingered inside my family's house. I walked quickly, boots crunching in fresh snow. The envelope pressed against my palm like evidence at a trial. Inside were receipts, photocopies of every bill, every catering deposit, every dollar I had invested in their so-called family Christmas. I carried them the way someone carries a match before striking it. After a 20-minute drive, I parked a block away from their house, timing my arrival for 8:30 p.m. when I knew dinner would be starting. Through frost-tipped trees, I could see their house glowing like a theater set. Cars lined the street, exhaust curling upward, muffling the hum of laughter that spilled from open windows. For a moment, I just stood there, listening to my sister's voice ring out, full of false brightness. "She's always late. Wait until you hear what we have planned for her." The room erupted in anticipatory laughter. I let the sound wash over me, then harden into resolve. I moved toward the side entrance, the service door where I'd carried trays in and out for years, invisible to their guests. My key still worked. Of course it did. No one changes locks for the daughter they expect to remain obedient. I slipped inside, immediately enveloped by warm air scented with cinnamon candles. My heart pounded in rhythm with the clinking glasses from the dining room. The space was decorated like a magazine spread, polished silverware gleaming, a mountain of wrapped gifts under the tree, my family gathered in their finery, all red and gold. My mother raised her hand for silence. When she finally shows, we'll toast. Then. Her smile was the same one she'd used to cut me down since I was 10. I leaned against the doorway, invisible for a moment, watching them rehearse their cruelty like it was theater. That was when I realized. Tonight, I didn't need to speak louder than them. I only needed to let their stage collapse under its own weight. I gripped the envelope tighter, then stepped forward. The floorboard creaked beneath my boot. Dozens of heads turned at once. My sister's smirk froze halfway. The silence was sudden and sharp, like the pause before a chandelier falls. Every pair of eyes latched onto me as if I had broken a spell. I didn't rush. I let the silence grow long enough to make someone shift uncomfortably in their chair. My sister recovered first, her voice pitched high with the confidence of someone who thought she'd already won. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she sneered. "Don't worry, everyone." We saved the best joke for last. A few cousins chuckled nervously, waiting for the cue to laugh harder. But something about the way I stood, coat still on, snow melting at my boots, kept them from going too far. I tilted my head slightly. "Funny," I said softly. "That's exactly what I came here to say." My father's brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" His voice carried authority, but I saw the faint twitch in his jaw. I set the envelope on the nearest table, sliding it across polished wood until it stopped in front of my mother's champagne flute. Every catering order, every deposit, my money, not yours. I kept the receipts. I paused, letting the words sink in. "Tonight's feast is already being served elsewhere. Hope you brought an appetite for leftovers." A murmur rippled through the room. My mother's hand trembled as she pulled the papers halfway out. My aunt leaned over, whispering, then gasping. My sister's laugh cracked. "You're bluffing. She's bluffing." But the truth was inked in bold numbers and signatures. The crowd didn't need my words, just the spreading silence as realization traveled like spilled wine across a white tablecloth. I stepped closer, letting the glow from the tree light one side of my face, the other swallowed by shadow. "You wanted a stage. You built it. But the punchline isn't mine. It's yours." My cousin coughed, uncomfortable. Someone shifted in their chair. The room tilted, the power sliding away from the center of the table where it had always resided. Then the doorbell rang, a sharp, echoing chime. Every head snapped toward the sound, relief sparking in their eyes, as if a guest might rescue them from the weight of what I'd revealed. But I already knew who was waiting outside. The chime echoed again, long and insistent, until my sister finally barked, "Someone get that!" A cousin scurried off, shoes squeaking against polished wood. The door opened, and in swept the December air along with 3 men in dark coats, their arms loaded with boxes, stamped with a logo no one at that table recognized. "Delivery for the Reed family," one of them announced, his voice steady and practiced. Confusion swept the room. My father stood, chest puffed, trying to reclaim control. We didn't order anything. One of the men set a box squarely in the center of the dining table, right on top of my mother's centerpiece of poinsettias and candles. "This is prepaid, signed by Vanessa Reed." All eyes darted back to me. I didn't flinch. I slipped my gloves off slowly, one finger at a time, letting the silence draw taut. "What? What is this?" My mother's voice cracked. "Your Christmas dinner," I said. "Or what's left of it. Everything you thought was yours, rerouted." I tapped the box. "These are empty packages." Tonight, the shelters eat like royalty. Gasps scattered across the room. My aunt covered her mouth. My cousin muttered something about the salmon. My sister went pale, then red, then pale again. My father's fist slammed the table, rattling glasses. "You ungrateful child." No, my voice cut sharp, colder than his. Not ungrateful, unpaid, unnoticed, unwanted, until you needed a servant. I swept my gaze across the guests, their curiosity curdling into discomfort. Look closer. The only humiliation here isn't mine. The men in coats tipped their hats and left, snow swirling behind them as the door clicked shut. Silence settled, thick as frost. The smell of extinguished candles stung the air where the boxes had crushed them. My family stared at the unopened package like it was a coffin lid. I let the moment breathe, the weight of truth pressing down. Then, with deliberate calm, I pulled out a single folded card from my pocket, one they hadn't seen yet, and laid it face down in front of my sister. Her fingers hovered over the card, hesitant for the first time in her life. My sister, who always tore into gifts like a queen impatient for jewels, now looked as if a single touch might scorch her. The guests leaned forward, whispers hissing like restless snakes. She flipped it open. The color drained from her face. This isn't real. Oh, it's real, I said, my voice low but steady. Every invoice, every bill in your name, every charge I let slide while you played princess. The credit cards you thought were unlimited? They're gone. I've canceled the accounts. I let the words drip slowly like melting icicles. Frozen. The murmur grew louder. One uncle squinted at the paper, then at her. Wait. This wedding fund? It's empty? My sister's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. She tried to laugh, but the sound fractured mid-breath. She's bluffing. She's just jealous. I shook my head. Check your phone. Try swiping tomorrow. Or better yet, ask the florist who called me this morning. Her hands shook as she dug into her clutch, pulling out her phone. The glow of the screen lit her face. One glance, and her lips parted in a silent, broken gasp. Around the table, eyes widened as they caught on. I wasn't bluffing. My mother clutched my father's arm, her voice sharp with panic. You let her... No, I cut in, stepping forward, my boots clicking on the wood. You made me. Years of standing in the corner, years of pretending crumbs were enough. Tonight was supposed to be my humiliation. I only mirrored yours back to you. The room had shifted completely. Guests who had come for laughter and spectacle sat stiff, unease flickering in their eyes. A few even looked at me not with pity, but with something closer to respect. My sister's phone slipped from her hand and clattered against the floor. The sound cracked through the silence, and in that sharp, stunned quiet, I whispered just loud enough, "Merry Christmas." Then I turned toward the staircase, because my next move wasn't here at the table. It was upstairs. The stairs creaked under my boots, each step louder than the last. Behind me, voices rose, my mother calling my name, my father demanding I come back down right now. But none of them followed. Fear or pride kept them glued to their seats. The hallway smelled faintly of pine and old wood polish. Family portraits lined the walls, smiling faces in matching sweaters, a gallery of lies. At the end of the hall was my old room, the door still painted in the pale lavender I'd chosen at 12. I pushed it open. Everything was untouched, staged like a museum exhibit. My trophies, my books, even the cracked snow globe I'd begged to keep, all frozen in time, like I'd never grown beyond the version of me they preferred. But tucked under my bed, exactly where I'd left it, was the small lockbox no one ever thought to check. The key turned easily. Inside lay a stack of papers, neatly folded. Not bills or receipts this time, but ownership documents, shares of the family business. I'd bought them quietly year after year with the money they never asked about, using the salary I'd earned working at the company but rarely spending. While they mocked me as the outsider, I became the silent partner they never noticed. I traced the embossed seal with my thumb, my chest steady. Downstairs, laughter had gone brittle, anxious. They still thought the damage ended at dinner. They had no idea the foundation itself was already mine. Footsteps sounded at the base of the stairs, hesitant, light, my sister's voice trembling now. "Vanessa, what are you doing up there?" I slipped the papers into my coat pocket and stepped back into the hallway. The tree lights downstairs flickered against the wall, distorted shadows stretching long. "I'm just collecting what was always mine," I called down, my tone calm, almost gentle. A pause. Then her whisper floated back, breaking on the edges of disbelief. "You can't. You wouldn't." But she knew. She always knew I was quieter, not weaker. I descended one step at a time, the weight of the papers heavy in my pocket, my final card, and this time, the silence followed me, not them. By the time I reached the bottom step, the living room had changed. The laughter was gone, replaced by restless murmurs, the kind that coil in a room when people realize the story isn't playing out as expected. My parents stood at the center like stranded monarchs, brittle crowns slipping. My sister lingered by the table, pale, her eyes fixed on my coat pocket as if she could see the edges of the documents through the fabric. I moved closer, steady, unhurried. Every gaze followed. The lights from the tree flickered, casting gold halos on the walls, but the warmth in the room had bled out. My father tried first, his voice hard with strain. "This is family business, Vanessa. You don't parade it in front of guests." I let the weight of his words fall uselessly between us. "Exactly," I said. "Family business." And lucky for me, I pulled the papers free and laid them flat on the table, right on top of the unopened box. "I own more of it than you ever bothered to notice." Gasps rippled. Someone stood to see better. My mother's hand trembled over her necklace, her knuckles white. My aunt whispered, "Thomas, is this true?" My father's face flushed crimson. "Those are forged. They're notarized," I cut in. "Every percentage accounted for. While you mocked me, I invested. While you planned to push me out, I was already inside." My sister's voice cracked. "Why? Why would you do this?" I looked at her, not with hate, but with something sharper. "Because you never saw me. You only saw what I could serve. Tonight was supposed to be my ending. Instead, it's your mirror." The room went still, heavy with realization. Guests shifted uneasily, a few glancing toward the door as if escape might spare them the discomfort of watching a family unravel. I stepped back, sliding the papers into my mother's untouched cranberry glass. "Merry Christmas," I whispered again, this time not bitter, but final. And then I turned toward the door, my boots carrying me through the cold draft of truth that now clung to every corner of that house. The front door groaned as I pulled it open, and for a breath, the house clung to me. Warmth, chatter, the faint sting of pine candles. But it wasn't mine. It never had been. Snow swept in, curling around my ankles, reminding me the night was wide and waiting. Behind me, voices rose, desperate. My mother's strained call. "Vanessa, wait. We can talk." My father's bark, brittle with pride. "You'll regret this stunt." My sister's plea, fragile, breaking. "Please don't leave it like this." I paused on the threshold, one hand on the frame. For the first time, I wasn't trembling. Their words didn't pierce. They slid off me like snow melting on a window pane. I turned just enough to see their faces, their perfect tableau now fractured, fear and disbelief carved into each expression. "I didn't burn this house down," I said softly. "I just stopped holding it up." A silence thicker than any storm followed. Guests stayed frozen, caught between sympathy and awe. Some looked at me with quiet nods, as if they understood. Others couldn't meet my gaze, ashamed they had laughed earlier when cruelty was rehearsed as comedy. I stepped into the snow. The door shut behind me with a heavy click. Outside, the world was crisp and untouched. Street lamps glowed against falling flakes, the air sharp with freedom. For once, the cold didn't bite. It cleansed. In my pocket, the documents pressed warm against my side. Proof not of revenge alone, but of reclamation. They wanted to write my story as humiliation. Instead, I walked away carrying the pen. I didn't need applause. I didn't need them to say I was right. The quiet truth was enough. I had broken free without breaking myself. As I reached the corner, I heard the faint echo of church bells striking midnight. Christmas had arrived, not theirs, mine. And with each toll, I felt lighter, as if the snow itself whispered, "You are no longer theirs to diminish." I kept walking, leaving footprints they could never follow. 3 months later, the lawyers finalized the paperwork. The family business restructuring was complete, with me as majority shareholder. My father took early retirement, my mother rarely speaks of me, and Olivia's wedding was downsized to a courthouse ceremony. We maintained polite, distant contact at quarterly board meetings, where I now sit at the head of the table. Sometimes healing means permanent separation, and I've found peace in the distance between us. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one. My fingertips went numb as I stared at the legal document on the polished mahogany desk. Removed as beneficiary. Full control transferred to Richard Carter, Jr. The words blurred as blood rushed in my ears. My uncle's signature at the bottom of the page was still wet, the blue ink glistening under the law office's recessed lighting. I had been summoned to this meeting via an email from my father's assistant this morning, with no hint of what was about to happen. Behind me, my father cleared his throat. "Rebecca, you need to understand how business works," he said, not even trying to hide the satisfaction in his voice. "The company needs strong leadership, not someone who disappears for months at a time." The corners of the document curled under my tightening grip. 3 years I'd spent restructuring my grandfather's failing business into a market leader. 3 years of 18-hour days, missed holidays, and postponed medical treatments. All while my cousin Richard Jr. had been in Barbados, finding himself. The company that should have been half mine, according to my grandfather's wishes, was now being handed to him completely. Uncle Richard placed a patronizing hand on my shoulder. "Your father and I think it's for the best. Women are too emotional for executive decisions." My name is Rebecca. I'm 28 and a business consultant. This is the story of how I reclaimed my family's legacy. The Carter family business had been built by my grandfather over 40 years. Carter Financial Solutions had started as a small investment firm and grown into a respected regional powerhouse. When my grandfather died 3 years ago, his will had specified that the company would be equally divided between his 2 sons, my father Thomas and my uncle Richard, with the understanding that their children would eventually take over. I had loved my grandfather fiercely. He was the only one who saw past my father's dismissals, who believed in my potential. While my father had tried to push me toward suitable careers for women, my grandfather had encouraged my interest in business and finance. He'd given me my first stock portfolio at 16 and mentored me through college. "She has the Carter instinct," he'd told my father repeatedly. "Better than your boy or Richard's son." My cousin Richard Jr. was 5 years older than me and had never shown any interest in the family business beyond the lifestyle it afforded him. My father's son from his second marriage, David, was still in high school and more interested in music than money. When the company began struggling after my grandfather's death, I had just finished my MBA. Despite my father's resistance, I approached my uncle Richard, the more reasonable of the 2 brothers. I came with a restructuring plan. Reluctantly, they'd given me a chance, bringing me in initially as a consultant. Within 6 months, I'd identified the bleeding points and implemented changes that stabilized the company. By the end of the first year, we were growing again. I worked directly with clients, restructured our service offerings, and modernized our approaches while maintaining the core values my grandfather had established. My uncle had seemed impressed. My father had remained coldly dismissive. "Beginner's luck," he'd say when quarterly reports showed improvement. Or, "Well, you had a good team implementing your ideas." Never acknowledgement, never approval. I'd been promised that after 3 years of proven results, I would be named co-CEO alongside Richard Jr. He had finally been coaxed back from his extended vacation to learn the business. The meeting today was supposed to formalize that arrangement. Instead, I was being completely removed from the company leadership structure. "You'll still receive a generous trust fund," my father said, checking his watch impatiently. "This way you can pursue whatever interests you without the burden of responsibility." The subtext was clear. The mere fact of being born female made me unfit for leadership in their eyes, regardless of my accomplishments or my grandfather's wishes. I looked between them, my father with his practiced indifference, my uncle with his artificial sympathy. I saw the truth. They had never intended to honor the arrangement. They had used me to save the business, extracted my ideas and labor, and now that the company was thriving again, they were discarding me. "What about grandfather's wishes?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. My father's mouth tightened. "Your grandfather was sentimental. The legal documents give us discretion over succession planning." "I see." I carefully set down the document and stood, smoothing my skirt. "And Richard Jr. is on board with this decision?" My uncle shifted uncomfortably. "He'll be back from Barbados next week to sign the final paperwork." Of course. They hadn't even bothered to include him in this meeting. The Golden Son didn't need to witness the disposal of the family disappointment. Then I guess there's nothing left to discuss. I gathered my purse and briefcase, maintaining the composure my grandfather had taught me was essential in business. Never let them see weakness. Never give them the emotional reaction they expect. My father looked almost disappointed by my calm. He'd expected tears, pleading, a feminine, emotional outburst that would justify their decision. Instead, I walked to the door, then paused. Just one question. Was this always the plan, or did you decide once the company became profitable again? The flicker in my uncle's eyes told me everything. "Goodbye, gentlemen." I closed the door quietly behind me. In the privacy of my car, I finally let the mask drop. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, fury and hurt coursing through me in equal measure. Not just for myself, but for my grandfather, whose wishes were being trampled by his own sons. I didn't cry. Crying wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I started planning. My father had always underestimated me, not just my business acumen, but my understanding of how he operated. While working at Carter Financial, I'd been careful and strategic, building relationships with key clients and employees, securing my access and information through multiple channels, maintaining independent records of all my work. I hadn't done this out of paranoia, but because my grandfather had taught me to always protect myself in business. "Trust is good," he'd say. "Documentation is better." That evening at home, I spread my personal records across my dining room table. Client contracts I'd secured, strategy documents with my notes, correspondence that proved my contributions. 3 years of meticulous documentation. I had always backed up important files to my personal cloud storage and kept physical copies of critical documents in a fireproof safe at my apartment, following my grandfather's advice about protecting yourself in business. More importantly, I had copies of concerning transactions I'd discovered during the restructuring. Instances where my father and uncle had used company resources for personal gain, blurring the lines between corporate and personal expenses in ways that skirted legality. I had screenshots of the transaction records, emails approving the transfers, and spreadsheets tracking the pattern of misuse over the past 2 years. At the time, I'd quietly corrected these issues without confrontation, believing it was better to fix problems than create conflict. I documented everything but kept it private, not wanting family drama to interfere with business recovery. Now, that documentation had new significance. My phone rang, displaying my cousin David's name. "Is it true?" he asked without preamble. "They're giving everything to Richard Jr.?" At 17, David was the only family member I was close to. Though technically my half-brother, our 12-year age gap and his mother's hostility toward me meant we'd never lived together. Still, I'd made efforts to be present in his life, recognizing in him the same outsider status I'd experienced. "It's true," I confirmed. "That's bullshit. You're the one who saved the company. Richard can't even read a balance sheet." His adolescent outrage was comforting in its sincerity. Dad was bragging to Mom about it at dinner. I heard everything through the heating vent in my room. They never realize how voices carry in that house. "How did you get my number?" "I thought your mom had blocked me on your phone," I asked, realizing we hadn't spoken in months. "I got a prepaid phone for emergencies, wrote down your number before she did the block," he explained with the resourcefulness typical of teenagers navigating parental restrictions. "What are you going to do?" The question crystallized something in me. What was I going to do? Accept the trust fund and disappear? Fight a legal battle against my own family that would drain me emotionally and financially? Neither option satisfied the sense of injustice burning in my chest. I'm not sure yet, I answered honestly, but I'm not walking away. After we hung up, I continued sorting through my documentation, a plan forming. The next morning, I called Janet Chen, the company's operations director and my closest ally within Carter Financial. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. I heard what happened, she said immediately as she slid into the booth across from me. It's despicable. Janet had been hired during my restructuring, one of several qualified women I'd brought in to modernize the company culture. My father and uncle had reluctantly agreed, recognizing that her expertise was undeniable, though they typically spoke to her male subordinates in meetings rather than addressing her directly. I need information, I told her, but I don't want to put your position at risk. They've already started dismantling your team, she replied. I've been reassigned to regional operations, which still gives me access to the main financial systems. It's only a matter of time before they push me out too. What do you need? Over the next 2 weeks, Janet became my eyes and ears within the company, confirming what I suspected. My father and uncle were already implementing changes that undermined the structures I'd put in place, returning to the problematic practices that had nearly bankrupted the company before. More concerning were the new financial maneuvers she uncovered, attempts to shift company assets before Richard Jr. took control, transactions that went beyond questionable into potentially fraudulent territory. They're treating the company like a personal ATM, Janet reported, sending me secure files through the encrypted messaging system we'd set up, and they're not being careful about it. Meanwhile, I began reaching out to key clients, people with whom I'd built strong relationships. I was careful, positioning my calls as courtesy farewell contacts rather than solicitation. I was surprised to hear you're leaving, said Marcus Wilson, CEO of our largest client. The board was very impressed with the changes you implemented. Family dynamics, I said simply. I wanted to thank you personally for your trust in me. Well, I hope wherever you land you'll stay in touch. We value partners who understand our needs the way you do. One by one, I had similar conversations, never explicitly criticizing Carter Financial, but letting clients know I was available for consultation. Seeds planted, nothing more. The third piece of my strategy involved Elijah Morris, my grandfather's former legal counsel, who had been pushed out by my father shortly after the inheritance. Elijah had known my grandfather for 40 years and had drafted most of the company's foundational documents. I still had his contact information from when he'd attended company events during my grandfather's time. I found his business card tucked away in my desk drawer and called his office, relieved when his secretary put me through immediately. I always wondered when you'd call, he said when we met for coffee. Your grandfather worried about this exact scenario. What do you mean? Elijah's eyes, sharp despite his 70 years, held mine. Why do you think he insisted on those quarterly board reviews, the external auditing requirements? He knew his son's tendencies. Then why leave them in charge at all? Because he believed in family legacy, but he also believed in checks and balances. Elijah pulled a file from his briefcase. There's something you should see. The document was a codicil to my grandfather's will that I'd never seen before, one specifying that if certain governance requirements weren't met, control would revert to a trust with specific succession provisions. The codicil stated that at the 3-year mark following his death, there would be a formal review of the company governance. If the board had failed to follow his stipulated transparency and accounting practices, alternate succession plans would take effect. This was supposed to be presented at the 3-year mark, Elijah explained. Your father and uncle knew about it, but apparently decided to ignore it, assuming you wouldn't discover its existence. Is it legally enforceable? Absolutely. But enforcing it would mean a very public, very messy family legal battle. He studied me carefully. Is that what you want? I considered the question seriously. A lawsuit would eventually give me what was rightfully mine, but at what cost? Years of litigation, family relationships destroyed beyond repair, the company itself potentially damaged in the process. No, I said finally. That's not what I want. I want justice, but not destruction. Elijah nodded approvingly. Your grandfather said you had not just his head for business, but his heart for people. So what's your play? I need to build leverage, enough that they'll negotiate rather than fight. Smart. What do you need from me? With Elijah's guidance, Janet's inside information, and my own documentation, I spent the next month building a comprehensive case, not for court, but for negotiation. The trust fund my father had mentioned provided me with enough financial stability to focus entirely on this effort. I identified exactly which transactions crossed legal lines, which clients were at risk of leaving, which employees were loyal to me rather than the company structure. I arranged everything meticulously, creating both a digital record and physical documentation. Then I waited for the perfect moment. It came sooner than expected. Richard Jr. returned from Barbados, signed the paperwork making him the heir apparent, and immediately began throwing his weight around. Within 2 weeks, he'd alienated 3 major clients and driven 2 key department heads to resignation. Janet called me in a panic. He's dismantling everything you built, and your father and uncle are letting him. The Johnson account is threatening to walk. That's 15% of our annual revenue. Is the quarterly board meeting still scheduled for Friday? I asked, checking my calendar where I'd marked the date months ago. Yes, but they've changed the format. No external participants, just family and senior leadership. I just got the calendar invite this morning. Perfect, I said. I need you to do one more thing for me. Janet agreed to arrange temporary access credentials for me, justifying it to IT as necessary for the transition of my remaining projects. She would also ensure my presentation materials were loaded onto the boardroom system before the meeting. We set up a secure file transfer that evening to get all my evidence onto the company servers without alerting anyone. On Friday morning, I dressed with particular care. A tailored charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back severely. Professional, serious, formidable. I arrived at Carter Financial exactly 15 minutes before the board meeting was scheduled to begin. The receptionist, new, someone I didn't recognize, looked startled when I gave my name. I don't have you on the visitor list, Ms. Carter. That's fine, I smiled pleasantly. My father and uncle are expecting me. This wasn't strictly true, but my confidence made her hesitate just long enough for Janet to appear in the lobby. Rebecca, right on time, I'll escort her back, she told the receptionist, who looked relieved to have the decision taken out of her hands. In the elevator, Janet handed me a security badge. Temporary consultant credentials. Gets you into the building and the boardroom. Everything else ready? She nodded. Exactly as you requested. The boardroom fell silent when I walked in. My father half rose from his chair, face darkening. This is a private meeting. You're not authorized to be here. Actually, I said calmly, taking a seat at the far end of the table, as a beneficiary of the Carter Trust and a named party in grandfather's succession plan, I have every right to be here. I placed my briefcase on the table and pulled out my copy of the trust document with the relevant section highlighted, especially given what I need to discuss. My uncle looked uncomfortable. Richard Jr., whom I hadn't seen in over a year, just looked confused. Whatever you think you're doing, my father began, it won't. 3 years ago, I interrupted, my voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. This company was on the verge of bankruptcy due to mismanagement and questionable financial practices. I was brought in to save it with the promise that I would eventually share leadership with my cousin. I nodded toward Richard Jr., who had the grace to look embarrassed. That promise has been broken. I've been removed from the succession plan entirely, against my grandfather's explicit wishes. Under normal circumstances, I might simply accept that and move on. I opened my briefcase and removed a thick folder. But these are not normal circumstances. For the next 20 minutes, I methodically outlined what I'd discovered. The financial irregularities, the systematic dismantling of the governance structures my grandfather had established, the client relationships now at risk. I presented documentation of each point, passing copies around the table. The most concerning issues, I continued, are these transactions. I highlighted several entries on the financial statement in front of them. Using company funds to cover personal expenses isn't just against company policy. It's potentially criminal. The IRS takes a particularly dim view of this kind of activity. My father's face had gone from red to white. My uncle was staring at the documents, sweat beading on his forehead. "What exactly do you want?" my father finally asked, his voice tight. "I want what's rightfully mine. 50% ownership of Carter Financial, as my grandfather intended, with equal decision-making authority to Richard Jr." I turned to my cousin. "If you're still interested in running the company, we can work together. If not, I'm prepared to buy your share at fair market value." "This is blackmail," my father sputtered. "No, it's negotiation. Blackmail would be taking this documentation to the SEC or the IRS. I closed my folder deliberately. I don't want to destroy our family business or see my father and uncle face legal consequences. I want justice and respect for my grandfather's wishes and my own contributions." Richard Jr. surprised everyone by speaking up. "She's right. I didn't want this anyway. I only came back because you both pressured me." He turned to me. "Would you really buy me out?" His unexpected support made sense. Richard Jr. had never wanted the responsibility of running the company. He'd made that clear for years, preferring to live off his trust fund rather than work 80-hour weeks. Being forced into a role he didn't want by his father and uncle had clearly made him more receptive to alternatives. For fair value, yes, or we can partner and leverage each other's strengths. My uncle, always more pragmatic than my father, placed a restraining hand on my father's arm. "Thomas, we need to consider this reasonably." "I'll give you 1 week to decide," I said, standing and gathering my materials. "Either we reach an agreement that honors grandfather's wishes, or I'll be forced to pursue other options to ensure justice is served." I walked out with my head high, heart pounding, but steps steady. In the elevator, Janet squeezed my arm supportively. "That was masterful," she whispered. "It's not over yet," I reminded her. After leaving the boardroom, I returned to my apartment to wait. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I received no direct communication from my father or uncle, though David kept me informed of the furious arguments happening at family dinners through our daily text messages. "Dad's livid, but Uncle Richard is scared," he reported. "Richard Jr. is actually taking your side, which is making them both crazy." On the 7th day, exactly at the deadline I'd set, I received a call from Elijah Morris. "They've contacted me to negotiate terms," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Apparently, they'd prefer this to be handled through intermediaries." The negotiations took another 2 weeks, but the outcome exceeded even my expectations. I received 50% ownership of Carter Financial, with equal voting rights to the share split between my father, uncle, and cousin. I would be co-CEO with Richard Jr., who had unexpectedly become an ally, admitting he had neither the interest nor aptitude for running the company alone. The papers were drawn up by Elijah and signed by all parties at his downtown office on a Tuesday afternoon. Most satisfying was the reinstatement of my grandfather's governance requirements, regular external audits, transparency in financial reporting, and a succession plan that would eventually include David when he was ready. As part of our agreement, the questionable financial transactions would be quietly corrected, with my father and uncle personally repaying the misappropriated funds to the company. No legal charges would be filed, but the external auditing process I reinstated would ensure such abuses couldn't happen again. My father refused to attend the signing ceremony, sending his lawyer instead. My uncle came but avoided eye contact throughout the proceedings. Only Richard Jr. seemed genuinely at peace with the arrangement. "You're better at this than I am," he admitted afterward. "I was only doing it to please my father. Maybe now we can both do what we're actually good at." It wasn't the warm family reconciliation part of me had hoped for, but it was justice. Not just for me, but for my grandfather's legacy. 3 months later, Carter Financial was thriving under our joint leadership. Richard Jr. handled client relations, his natural charm finally being put to productive use, while I managed operations and strategy. We rehired the key staff who had left and restored the client relationships that had been damaged. My father maintained cold distance, our relationship essentially severed except for mandatory quarterly board meetings, where we interacted with formal politeness. The final break in our personal relationship was painful but necessary. He had made it clear he would never accept me as an equal. My uncle gradually began consulting me on decisions, a reluctant acknowledgement of my value. David started an internship in our marketing department, bringing fresh ideas and energy. Janet, whose loyalty had been instrumental in my success, was promoted to Chief Operating Officer, a position that recognized both her abilities and her integrity. One evening, working late, I found myself in my grandfather's old office, now mine, staring at his portrait on the wall. "I did it, Grandpa," I said softly to the painting. "I protected your legacy." I could almost hear his voice in response. "No, Rebecca, you built your own." Family businesses are complicated ecosystems where blood and money intertwine in ways that can nurture or poison. My father and uncle had tried to use those connections to discard me when I was no longer useful. Instead, I'd used the very values my grandfather had instilled in me: preparation, documentation, strategic thinking, to reclaim my rightful place, not through destruction but through leverage, not through abandoning the business, but by fighting for it, not by becoming like them, but by remaining true to myself and my grandfather's vision. The Carter name now stands for something stronger than it did before, not just financial success, but integrity and justice, a legacy worth fighting for, worth preserving, worth building upon. Sometimes true revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reconstruction, building something better from the broken pieces, something your opponents have no choice but to acknowledge and respect. That's how I reclaimed my family's legacy, not with a scorched earth, but with a carefully cultivated garden, where even those who tried to exclude me must now watch me thrive. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.